The lie slid into the conference room like it had every right to be there. I was standing near the back wall, holding a manila folder pressed tight against my chest. 5 venture capitalists sat around a long glass table, nodding slowly at everything Trevor said. The room smelled like fresh coffee and expensive cologne. Everyone looked impressed. Trevor stood at the front, calm and polished. His suit was perfect. His smile never wavered. "Our company already owns the building," he said, gesturing at the exposed brick walls around us. My stomach dropped. Owns, not leases, not rents from someone else. Owns. Because that building, the one with the creaking elevator and the warm bakery scent drifting up from the ground floor, was mine. Not partially mine. Not shared with anyone. Mine. My name was on the deed. My name was on the lease. I had signed every single page of that paperwork 2 years ago, sitting in a lawyer's office with shaking hands and grateful tears. And Trevor had just erased all of it with one smooth sentence. He didn't glance at me once. My sister Nadia sat beside him, smiling proudly like nothing was wrong. I tightened my grip on the folder, because inside it was the lease agreement, and it told a completely different story. One investor leaned forward and asked the question that made my hands go cold. "My name is Audrey Whitfield. And I need to go back 3 years so this story makes any sense. My mother passed away in the spring, quietly and without warning. She had been sick for a while, but none of us truly believed it would end the way it did. When the will was read, I sat in a stiff chair and tried to keep my breathing steady. The building on Callaway Street belonged to me. 3 floors. Downtown brick, old but solid. The ground floor had been rented to a bakery for 6 years. The smell of cinnamon and warm sugar drifted up through the vents every morning. The 2 floors above it were office space. Plain walls, wide windows, good natural light. It wasn't glamorous. It wasn't the kind of inheritance people dream about. But it was real. It was stable. And stability was something my family had always struggled with. My mother had worked her whole life to own something permanent. She saved slowly. She sacrificed quietly. She wanted to leave me something that no one could take away from me. That building was her gift. It was the most careful, most loving thing she had ever done in her entire life. And it was mine. 2 months after the funeral, my sister called me crying. Nadia's voice broke twice before she got to the point. She and Trevor, her husband of 4 years, had been pouring everything into his startup. The company built project management software. It had a real product, real clients, and real potential. But it needed space. A proper headquarters. Somewhere that looked like a serious, established company actually operated there. Rent downtown was expensive. "We can't afford market rate," Nadia said quietly. "Not right now." I already knew where the conversation was going. And honestly, I didn't hesitate. They were family. Trevor had always been decent to me. He had shown up when our mother was sick. He had helped carry boxes after the funeral. He was loud and confident, and sometimes too much, but he had a good heart. At least, I believed he did. I offered them the top 2 floors at half the market rate. Month to month at first, just to give them flexibility while the company found its footing. We signed a proper lease. My lawyer drafted every clause. I handed over the keys on a Thursday morning in October. Trevor shook my hand and grinned that wide grin of his. "You won't regret this, Audrey. I promise." I believed him completely. Then he said something that would stay with me long after that handshake was forgotten. "When this company takes off," Trevor said, still holding my hand, "we'll all own this place together." He said it casually, like it was already decided, like the paperwork we had just signed didn't matter, like ownership was simply a matter of who wanted it badly enough. Something tightened in my stomach. It was a small feeling, easy to ignore, easily explained away. I almost laughed it off. I almost said something like, "Let's focus on the lease for now." But Nadia was beaming beside him, and I didn't want to be the one who ruined the moment. They were excited, they were hopeful, and I wanted to be happy for them. So I let it go. I told myself it was just Trevor being Trevor. Big talk, ambitious language. He always said things like that, dramatic, forward-looking, a little over the top. He didn't mean anything real by it. But the word own sat at the back of my mind like a small pebble in a shoe. Because I had learned from watching my mother that words about property are never casual. They mean something. They always mean something. I just didn't understand yet how much that one word would cost all of us. 6 months passed. Then, at a networking event, I heard Trevor say something that stopped me cold. The event was held at a hotel ballroom downtown. I wasn't even supposed to be there. A colleague had passed me his extra ticket last minute, and I had gone mostly out of curiosity. The room was packed with startup founders, investors, and consultants in expensive blazers, all swapping business cards and drinking red wine. Trevor was near the center of the crowd, talking to a small group of people. I spotted him from across the room and started walking over to say hello. Then I heard him. "Our headquarters is just 2 blocks from here," he said, gesturing in the direction of my building. "We own the whole space, great bones, tons of character." I stopped walking. He was talking about my building, calling it theirs. I waited for him to correct himself, to say leased or rented or anything that was even slightly accurate. He didn't. I walked over and placed a hand on his arm, smiling politely at the group. "Leased headquarters," I said gently. "Really great space, though." Trevor laughed. "Easy and smooth. Same difference, right?" The people around him chuckled lightly. But it wasn't the same. Not even close. From that night forward, the gentle corrections stopped working. At first, I told myself it was just a habit he had fallen into. People slip into language patterns without meaning to. Trevor was proud of the company. He was excited about where they were going. Using own instead of lease was probably just enthusiasm getting ahead of accuracy. But then it started spreading. One of his colleagues mentioned Trevor's building in an email thread I was copied on. A business contact of mine asked, "Didn't you sell that property downtown?" A mutual friend said she'd heard the building had been in the family for years. I corrected each one, but each correction felt smaller than the last. Nadia had always been the person I expected to back me up. She knew the truth. She had been present when the lease was signed. She had read the paperwork herself. But when her friends visited the office and called it Trevor's place, she smiled. She didn't say a word. The story was quietly, steadily being rewritten, and the more it was repeated, the more solid it became. Like cement setting in slow motion. By the time you noticed it hardening, it was already too late to reshape. Trevor had stopped pretending his language was a mistake. He said it deliberately now. Then one afternoon, a contractor called my phone. "Am I speaking with the property owner?" the man asked. "Yes," I said. "This is Audrey Whitfield." "Right." A pause. "I'm a contractor. I'm standing on the 2nd floor right now. Trevor asked me to come assess a load-bearing wall. He wants it demolished to open up the floor plan." My chest tightened immediately. I didn't authorize any renovations. A longer pause. "He told me you were fully on board." I told the contractor to stop everything and leave the site. He was polite about it. He said he would hold off until he heard back from both parties. I hung up and sat very still. Trevor had contacted a contractor. He had described specific structural changes he wanted made. He had told that contractor the owner was already in agreement. And he had done all of this without saying a single word to me. That wasn't a slip of the tongue. That wasn't enthusiasm or careless habit. That was someone behaving as if they already owned a building they had only leased from me. I drove to the office and confronted him that same afternoon. He was leaning against his desk when I walked in, relaxed, and when I told him what had happened, he smiled at me. "You're overreacting," Trevor said. He wasn't angry. He wasn't embarrassed. He was calm, the way someone is calm when they believe the argument is already beneath them. "The wall change was minor," he continued. "Honestly, Audrey, it would have made the space work better for everyone. You didn't ask me. I didn't think I needed to." Nadia appeared in the doorway. I hadn't heard her come in. "She's right that you should have mentioned it," she said carefully, looking at Trevor. But then she turned to me. "It's also kind of a family space, Audrey. You know that. Family space." I felt those 2 words settle over me like something cold and heavy. Because the deed had one name on it, because the lease had one name on it, because a shared family history does not change a legal document. I kept my voice flat and steady. I told Trevor that any structural changes required my written approval before work began. That was in the lease. Clause 7, paragraph 2. He could read it himself if he had forgotten. He nodded slowly, like he was indulging me. like I was being difficult about something small and unreasonable. I drove home in silence. Then the rent stopped arriving on time. The first late payment came 30 days after the contractor incident. I told myself it was a coincidence. Cash flow problems were completely normal for growing startups. They had expenses I couldn't see. It probably wasn't connected to anything else. I let it go. The second late payment came 40 days after that. This time there was a brief text from Nadia. Sorry, funds got tied up this month. Sending Thursday. It arrived the following Monday. I said nothing. I told myself I was being flexible, understanding, the kind of family member who doesn't make things harder during a difficult season. But I kept a record. Not because I was planning anything, just because my mother had always told me to write things down. Paper doesn't forget, she used to say. People do. So I kept a small notebook in my desk drawer. Date, amount, whether it arrived late. Notes about every unusual conversation. I didn't know then that this notebook would become one of the most important things I owned. I still hoped everything would settle. I still believed, somewhere underneath my growing worry, that Trevor was just stretched thin and that things would eventually improve. Then one evening, I walked into that stairwell and heard something that changed everything. I had gone back to the building after hours to collect files I needed for an early morning meeting. The offices were mostly empty. The lights on the second floor were dim. I took the stairs because the elevator was slow and my arms were already full. Halfway up the stairwell, I heard Trevor's voice echoing down from above. He was on his phone. We own the building outright, he said. Yes, fully ours. No landlord involved. No lease complications. It's a company asset. I stood completely still. My files shifted in my arms, and I pressed them back against my chest, afraid even the smallest sound might give me away. He kept talking. That's part of what makes this opportunity so compelling to investors. The physical asset is already secured. They should feel very comfortable about that. He wasn't bragging casually to a friend. He wasn't exaggerating out of habit. He was pitching. He was describing my building as something his company owned outright, as a financial asset to attract serious investment funding. While a lease agreement signed by both of us sat in a drawer just down the hall. My feet didn't move for a long, long time. Then my sister called the next morning and asked me to bring paperwork to a meeting. Nadia called just after 8. There's an investor meeting on Thursday, she said. Trevor wants everything to look polished. Can you bring a copy of the utility records for the building? Just for reference, in case anyone asks about operating costs. Something felt wrong immediately. But I said yes. I thought I was being brought in as the property owner to support accurate documentation. Maybe Trevor had decided to be more careful. Maybe this was him course-correcting, quietly, without making it into a bigger issue. I arrived 10 minutes early. The conference room was already set up. Printed materials, branded folders, a clean presentation on the screen. 5 venture capitalists filed in. I stood near the back wall, holding my folder. Trevor began. He talked about the product, the growth numbers, the market size. He was good at it. Confident, clear, and compelling. I understood why people found him believable. Then he reached the assets section. He clicked to a new slide. Our company owns this building, he said smoothly. It's a fully secured physical asset, no landlord risk, no lease complications. He gestured to the exposed brick wall behind him. The investors nodded. My mouth went dry. Then an investor leaned forward and asked a direct question that made the whole room shift. So there's truly no landlord involved? The investor asked. Trevor smiled confidently. None. The room relaxed. A few people made notes. One investor leaned back in his chair with a look that said he was completely satisfied. I stood near the back wall. My hands were shaking. Not with rage. Not yet. With something quieter and colder. The feeling of watching someone take something from you right in front of your eyes while everyone around you applauds. I could have interrupted. I could have walked to the front and said, actually, I own this building. I have the lease agreement in my hands right now. But I didn't. Because I knew how it would look. Trevor would smile, someone would laugh awkwardly, and the whole moment would be twisted into something ugly, like I was causing a scene over a personal misunderstanding. So I stayed quiet. I watched. I let him finish. When the meeting ended, I slipped out before anyone could stop me. I sat on a bench outside and the cold air hit my face, and I stayed there until my hands stopped shaking. This wasn't confusion anymore. This wasn't habit or enthusiasm or careless language. This was deliberate. And my sister had known. She had helped set the whole thing up. I went home that night and pulled out the lease. I had always kept the original in a fireproof box under my bed. My lawyer had one copy. I had one copy. That was it. I sat at my kitchen table under a bright lamp and read every single line slowly and carefully. Most of it I already knew well. Payment terms, maintenance responsibilities, notice requirements for early termination. I had reviewed it twice a year since the day it was signed, but this time I was looking for something specific. I found it on page 4, Clause 11, Misrepresentation. It read, any material misrepresentation of ownership or tenancy status, particularly in connection with financing, investment, or any third-party agreements, constitutes an automatic and immediate breach of this lease and entitles the property owner to pursue full termination without any additional notice period required. I read it 3 times. Then I set the paper down carefully. My lawyer had insisted on that clause years ago when we first drafted the document. At the time, I had thought she was being overly cautious. I had never once imagined I would need it. But Trevor had walked into that meeting and done exactly what that clause described, word for word. And the closer I looked at everything else, the worse it got. I pulled out my small notebook, the one I had been keeping in my desk drawer, the one with dates, payment records, and handwritten notes from every strange conversation and uncomfortable moment over the past year. I spread it open next to the lease and started going through everything carefully. Late rent payments. 2 of them, fully documented with dates and amounts. Unauthorized renovation attempt. The contractor had sent me a follow-up email confirming the cancellation. That email was still sitting in my inbox. Unauthorized subleasing. 2 months earlier, I had noticed Trevor renting out a row of desks to freelance workers with no connection to his company. He had never asked me. The lease was explicit. No subleasing without my written consent. And then the investor misrepresentation. The most serious violation by far. Alone, each violation was manageable. Late payments happen. Miscommunications happen. A thoughtful landlord might overlook any one of them, especially with family involved. But together they formed a clear, documented, deliberate pattern of behavior from someone who had quietly decided the rules of the lease simply did not apply to him. My hands didn't shake this time. I picked up my phone and dialed Patricia Cole, my lawyer, first thing the following morning. Her reaction was not what I expected. Patricia listened without interrupting. That was the thing I had always respected most about her. She let you finish. She didn't jump ahead or start forming answers halfway through. She sat with the information, turned it over quietly, and then spoke. When I finished, she was silent for a moment. He told investors he owned the building? She asked. Yes, in front of 5 people, in a formal pitch meeting. And you were present in the room. I was standing near the back wall with the lease in my hands. She exhaled slowly. Audrey, that's not a gray area. That's not a misunderstanding someone can easily explain away. If you use that building as a financial asset in an investment pitch, while knowing he only held a lease, and while you were physically present in the room, that is a serious and documented misrepresentation. I know. Do you have witnesses? 5 investors, plus my sister. Another pause. You have the original lease stored safely? Fireproof box, under my bed. She almost laughed at that. Then you have everything you need, she said. She told me she wanted to meet in person the following morning. There was one question she needed to ask me before we could move forward together. And it was a question I hadn't thought about until that moment. Patricia sat across from me at her desk the next morning, her hands folded neatly. Before we do anything, she said, I want to ask you something important. I nodded. Do you want revenge? I looked at her carefully. The question surprised me. Not because it was offensive, because it was honest. She wasn't being dramatic. She was asking because the answer genuinely mattered. It would shape the entire approach we took from that morning forward. I thought about it seriously. I thought about the conference room, the investors nodding, Trevor's smooth, confident voice saying no landlord while I stood 3 feet behind him. Nadia's quiet smile beside him. I thought about my mother saving for decades to own something permanent, something solid, something she could leave behind that no one could simply take away. And I thought carefully about what I actually wanted from all of this. No, I said, I don't want revenge. Then what do you want? I want the truth documented. I want the lease honored. I want the record to show exactly what happened and exactly who owns what. Patricia looked at me for a long, steady moment. Then she picked up her pen. Good, she said quietly. Revenge is messy. The truth is clean. She opened her notepad. Then we let the lease speak. We filed the breach notice the very next morning. The certified letter arrived at Trevor's office the following Thursday. Patricia had drafted every word carefully. It outlined the 3 documented violations: the unauthorized renovation attempt, the repeated late rent payments, and, most critically, the material misrepresentation of ownership made to potential investors on a specific date, at a specific location, in front of named and identifiable witnesses. Trevor was given 15 days to respond formally and begin the cure process. 15 days. I thought about whether that was enough time for him to understand how serious this was. Patricia said it was more than fair. 2 days after the letter was delivered, Trevor walked into my office. He didn't knock. He came in fast, his jaw tight and his eyes sharp. What is this? He held up the envelope. A breach notice, I said. You're trying to destroy the company. I kept my voice completely steady. You misrepresented my property to investors, Trevor. That is a breach. It is written in the lease, Clause 11. You're doing this because you're jealous of what we've built. I looked at him evenly. I'm doing this because you lied. He stared at me for a long moment, then turned and walked out without another word. Nadia arrived less than an hour later. She came in much quieter than Trevor had. She didn't storm in. She didn't shout. She sat down in the chair across from my desk and looked at me with tired, heavy eyes. You're going to destroy the company, she said. Nadia, he's so close to closing this round. You know how hard he's worked for this. You know what it means to both of us. I let her finish speaking. I'm not trying to destroy anything, I said. I'm enforcing a contract that all of us agreed to and signed. It's just a piece of paper. It's a legal document protecting my property. My property, Nadia. Mom left that building to me, not to us, to me. Her eyes shifted slightly. You act like I don't know that. Then you also know that what Trevor told those investors wasn't true. She was quiet for a long moment. He was just trying to make the company look stronger to get the deal closed. By lying about owning something he doesn't own. She looked down at her hands. You could have just talked to us privately instead of doing this. I tried. Remember the contractor? The late payments? The networking event? I talked to him every single time, and nothing ever changed. She had no answer for that. She sat for another minute, then stood up slowly and left without saying another word. But Trevor had no intention of complying. The 15-day cure period came and went. Trevor did not respond to the notice. He did not contact Patricia. He did not contact me. He made no acknowledgement of the letter in any form whatsoever. Instead, according to someone who attended 2 separate startup events that month, he continued pitching investors using the exact same language as before. Same slide, same claim, same confident smile. The building as a company asset. No landlord, fully secured. Patricia called me on day 18. He's ignored the notice entirely, she said. I know. He's also missed the cure deadline. I know. Which means the breach is now confirmed on the record. We can move forward. I had been expecting this, but hearing it spoken out loud still made my chest feel heavy. Not because I doubted the decision. Because moving forward meant crossing a line that could not be uncrossed. It meant this was no longer a family matter that could be quietly resolved over dinner. It meant lawyers, courtrooms, and documents filed in a permanent public record. Patricia said the word I had been mentally preparing myself for all week. Court. I exhaled slowly through my nose. File it, I said. When Trevor found out, he laughed. I heard about his reaction secondhand from Nadia. She called me the evening after Patricia officially filed the case. He thinks you're bluffing, she said. Her voice was flat. She sounded exhausted. I'm not. He said you would never actually take family to court. I didn't respond to that. He's going to fight it, Audrey. That's his right. She paused. Is there any way we could still... No, I said gently but clearly. There isn't. Not anymore. The filing went through officially the following morning. A case number was assigned. A hearing date was set. And suddenly, the lie that had lived only in conference rooms and casual conversations had a formal paper trail attached to it. Physical documents, exact dates, witness names, signed statements from multiple parties. Trevor hired an attorney, a fairly expensive one, from what I heard. He told people in their social circle that the lawsuit was a family misunderstanding that would be resolved very quickly. But the investors had already started asking questions. One of them, a woman named Petra Walsh, who had attended the original pitch, sent an email to Patricia's office requesting documentation of the property's official ownership status. The funding round had not yet closed. The whole picture was shifting fast. Petra Walsh was not the only investor asking questions. Within a week of the filing, 2 more venture capitalists from the original meeting had reached out. One sent a formal, written inquiry. Another placed a direct call to Patricia. Then Petra emailed me personally. It was a short message, 2 sentences. Miss Whitfield, I've been made aware of a potential dispute regarding the property at your building's address. Could you confirm whether you are the current owner of record? I replied the same afternoon. Yes. I am the owner of record. The building was transferred to me through my mother's estate. A lease agreement was signed with the current occupants approximately 2 years ago. I attached nothing further. I added nothing more. Her reply arrived within the hour. Thank you for clarifying. This contradicts what was formally represented to us during the investment meeting. 1 sentence. But it carried a weight I could feel pressing against my chest. The funding round froze 2 days later. Not officially suspended, but frozen completely. No signatures. No wire transfers. No forward movement of any kind. Trevor's attorney sent Patricia a brief message offering to explore an informal resolution before the hearing. Patricia forwarded it to me with a single line at the bottom. Too late for informal, see you in court. The hearing date finally arrived. I woke up early on the morning of the hearing. I showered, dressed in dark navy, and sat at my kitchen table with a cup of tea that went cold before I touched it. I wasn't afraid exactly. I wasn't angry either. I was something quieter and more centered than both of those things. Steady, I think, is the right word. Patricia met me outside the courthouse at 8:30. She carried 2 organized folders and wore the calm expression of someone who had done this hundreds of times before. The courtroom was smaller than I had imagined. Trevor arrived with his attorney. He was dressed sharply, and from across the room he still had that confident posture. The one that said he fully expected things to go his way. Nadia came too. She sat in the back row, not beside Trevor and not beside me. Just alone in the middle of things, somewhere between the two. The judge was a composed, sharp-eyed woman named Judge Hartfield. She reviewed her documents, then looked up and spoke. The question at the center of this matter is straightforward, she said. She looked from Trevor's attorney to Patricia. Who holds the deed to the property in question? Patricia opened her folder calmly. Trevor's attorney began to speak. But before he could finish, something happened that stopped the room cold. Patricia didn't wait for Trevor's attorney to complete his sentence. She stood and placed a certified copy of the deed, registered, notarized, and issued by the county recorder's office, directly in front of Judge Hartfield. Then she placed the lease agreement beside it. Then she turned to page 4 and pointed clearly to clause 11. Your Honor, Patricia said, the property owner is Audrey Whitfield. The deed confirms this without question. The lease confirms this. And on a specific date, in front of 5 named and available witnesses, the defendant, while operating as a paying tenant under this lease, represented to potential investors that his company owned this property outright and free of any lease obligations. The clause before you makes clear that this representation constitutes an automatic and immediate breach. The room was very quiet. Trevor's attorney spoke about context and intent, and the informal nature of investor conversations. The judge did not look convinced. She read the clause carefully. She reviewed the deed. She examined the email from Petra Walsh confirming exactly what had been represented to her at that meeting. Then she looked directly at Trevor. Do you hold the deed to this property? She asked. Trevor's jaw tightened. His attorney leaned over quickly to whisper something, but the paperwork had already spoken for itself. The ruling came faster than anyone in that room expected. Judge Hartfield didn't take long. She reviewed the final documents, made 2 brief notes on her pad, and delivered her ruling clearly and without hesitation. The lease was terminated. Trevor's company had 14 days to vacate the premises entirely. The court also issued a formal finding that the representation made to investors that the company owned the building outright was a material misrepresentation that triggered the breach clause exactly as written. This finding was now entered into the permanent public record. Trevor sat very still in his chair. His attorney was already speaking quietly into his phone before they had fully left the courtroom. Nadia didn't look at me as she walked out, but I saw her face. She looked like someone who had watched something they helped build slowly fall apart and had finally stopped pretending it wasn't happening. Not angry, just exhausted. And somewhere underneath that exhaustion, I thought I saw something that looked almost like relief. 2 days after the ruling, the funding round officially collapsed. Every investor withdrew. The company never recovered from the loss. Trevor put out a brief public statement saying the business had pivoted directions, but everyone in their circle knew what had actually happened. The lie had a beginning, a middle, and now, finally, cleanly, an end. Standing outside the building months later, I finally understood something my mother had always known. 6 months after the ruling, the top 2 floors had new tenants. A small architecture firm took the 3rd floor. A wellness consulting practice moved into the 2nd. Both signed proper leases. Both paid on time, every month, without a single late payment. Both understood exactly what the relationship was from day one. I stood in the lobby one morning, listening to the building settle into its new rhythm. Footsteps moving above me. The distant hum of voices through the ceiling. The familiar smell of cinnamon drifting up from the bakery below, same as it always had. Some things don't change. I thought about Trevor standing in that conference room with his perfect suit and his easy smile, telling 5 investors that the building was his. He had believed that confidence was enough. That if you said something with enough certainty and enough people nodded along with you, the truth would eventually bend in your direction. But the truth doesn't bend. It waits. It waits in fireproof boxes under beds, in certified letters sent by careful lawyers, in lease clauses drafted for situations you hope will never come, in small notebooks kept in desk drawers by people whose mothers told them to always write things down. I hadn't needed to argue in that courtroom. I hadn't needed to shout or perform or convince anyone of anything. I had simply needed to let the lease speak, and when it finally did, every single person in that room listened. My mother would have smiled.